Good evening, everybody. Welcome and thank you all for coming. Sorry for the slight delay. Matt decided to add to the drama of his act by falling down the stairs a few minutes ago, but he's okay. He's okay and he will continue. He just might have to stay sitting down, that's all. Firstly, if you've got a phone with you, please can you put it on silent? And just to make the point, I should put mine on silent right away, because I just realised that applies to me too. So silent, please, on your phones. Secondly, if there is a fire alarm, very unlikely, but if there is, you've got two exits and there will be stewards outside to direct you in the right direction. Those of you who follow our public lectures events, the lecture on the 4th of March by Matt Cook, Queer Beyond London, has been postponed. So that's just on the notices. And at the end of this Matt's act, it's more of an act than a lecture, isn't it?
Yeah.
There will be an opportunity to ask questions. We'll deal with that later. Right, a little bit about what we're up to. Before I say something about Matt, who we're really delighted he could come this evening, even with a funny ankle. This is part of a number of events under the banner of Hope Not Heat. And this programme of activities, which we've got today, we've got some tomorrow, I had one last Saturday, some are public, some are for members only. The background to this was what we were hearing was that quite a lot of people are concerned about the climate, but so concerned they feel almost paralysed. So the Hope Not Heat was saying, there's always hope, there's always stuff worth doing. And if you haven't yet found your way to the website, please do. I think searching Hope Not Heat will show it up. And there's information, there's ideas, there's links, and there's the rest of the programme. In particular, tomorrow afternoon at 5:15 at Northumbria, we're showing a film called 2040. It's a very inspiring film coming out of an Australian organisation about what is possible for a good future based on what we already know. In other words, don't wait for new technology. We've got lots of stuff we can do. It's a really great film. So do come along, 5:15 tomorrow. Again, book online, but it's free, and we'd love to see you there. So, right, Matt. Matt is now quite a celebrity. I first heard him, I think it was probably 2019 at the Greenbelt Arts Festival. So I knew he was a good booking, and I was very pleased when he agreed to come along. And I'm not sure talk's the right word, act for us tonight, or whatever it is you want to call it. He's a climate scientist with a PhD in environmental economics, published papers. He's given a TED talk. He's been on the BBC, he's hosted programmes. He's even been on my favourite programmes, The News Quiz and The Now Show. So he's been all over the place. He runs workshops, he does sessions like this, and he's always pleased to talk to people, whether it's 20 or 200 or perhaps nearly 300 we've got here tonight. He's currently based at University College London, where he does some lecturing, but he still gets out and about to do these talks, and he hobbles from here to there as best he can. Matt, it's lovely to have you. Looking forward to your talk.
Thanks, John.
And in about something like 45 minutes' time, we'll deal with questions. Anybody be ready with questions? We'll have microphones. So I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, Matt.
Wonderful, thank you. Right. Right, I'm going to sort of hobble very quickly at the start. Pleasure to be here. Did people over there see me falling down the stairs? Yes. And did you think, oh, it's just some guys just falling down the stairs? Some drunk Scottish man. I turn 40 tomorrow. Well, thank you. I mean, I don't know if it's applause or not, but I'm going to have to. I'm going to get home tonight about 1 in the morning, and then I'm going to wake up in the morning, and my wife's going to be like, happy birthday, and I'm going to be like, I can't walk. Anyway, lovely to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. My name is genuinely Dr. Winning, the most positive name you can get. When we did, I've got a 4-year-old, when we had him 4 years ago. When we had him, we did have a conversation about what we should call him, as you do. I wanted to call him Oscar. My wife point blank refused, but every marriage is a negotiation. So we came to an agreement, and now his middle name is Academy Award. So as John said, I've got a PhD in climate change policy. I like to tell people I'm the sort of doctor that if you do have a heart attack on a flight, I will rush to your side, but only to berate you for flying. What else should I say? I have, a PhD. Anyone else got a PhD in here? Got a couple, yeah. I can see a few of you. You think that becoming a doctor, is going to entry into this world of sophistication where people are going to respect you, right? The only thing that has changed in my life in the last, 14 years since I got my PhD, is that my family have something to hit me with, metaphorically, when I do something stupid. Because I'm constantly leaving my bag on a train, and my wife's like, but you have a PhD. How can you leave your bag on a train again? And I have to say, I don't have a PhD in not leaving bags on trains. What would that even entail? And can I get some funding for it? That's me. Normally I walk about a lot. I roam around, and there's a lot of energy, so I'm going to have to try and rein myself in a bit here. So I apologize if I look like I'm about to do something and then decide to sit down instead. So, as John said, I'm a researcher. I've worked on climate change for about 16 and a half years, pretty much. I was in the last round of a bunch of papers of mine in the last round of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Working Group 3 on climate mitigation. That's what, and mitigation is a board word. How do we stop climate change? What do we do about it? That's what I work on. I've done stuff that's advised the UK government about what we need to do, how quickly we need to decarbonise. When you hear some of those numbers about we need to, reduce emissions 8% a year by 2030 or something like that. That's one of my papers, probably. And I do work on the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change. I could do with a doctor right now. Or as my dad likes to say, Matthew's 39 and still at university. But I am a comedian, so just so you've got an idea of where I am in the UK comedy industry, where I am in the pecking order, I'm the sort of comedian that's followed on social media by the European corrugated board industry. Cardboard is very much my target demographic. Worst thing about it, more followers than me. And when I found that out, I wanted to walk directly into the ocean, which will become increasingly easy over the coming decades. And there we go, that's the first climate change joke. Watch out, thank you. It's just that for the next 45 minutes. Don't follow them back though, so who's the real winner here? Nobody. It's hard, talking about, the reason I go out and do this and talk to people about climate change using jokes and being fairly silly and flippant is one that I feel like I can do that because it's what I live and breathe and I understand the severity of it. But there's lots of reasons to do it because it's a good way of kind of getting people to engage. Like, for instance, I don't imagine all of you would have turned up today had this been a lecture that was just a lecture on climate change. And it gets people, it's sort of an easy way into it. And it's difficult because people feel like they can't really engage with climate change. It's very scientific. And people worry about coming across like they don't kind of know what they're talking about a little bit. For most people, talking about climate change is a bit like talking about your partner's job. Right? In the sense that you think you know what you're talking about until you actually have to explain it to somebody. And then you find yourself panicking and going, what does my wife do for a living? Well, she's always on Zoom calls. She's always on calls and she's always saying important stuff like we need to start thinking outside the box. She works for the European corrugated board industry. Okay, so this is the structure of today's show. I'm an academic, so what I like to do is I like to tell you what I'm about to tell you. Then I spend an hour telling you, and then afterwards I'll tell you that I told you what I was going to tell you. Because we are nothing apart from pedantic, or as the young people call it, spoilers. This is the spoilers. 3 questions that I think we need to answer as a society if we want to solve the climate crisis. and they just happen to be the same 3 questions that you would be asked at any job interview for a bureau de change. Must we change? Can we change? And will we? You get the idea. Okay, no problem. So we're going to go through those one at a time. First of all, right, people say we need to save the planet. The planet's going to be absolutely fine, right? I'm not worried about the planet. The planet's okay. The reason I care about climate change is people, plants, and animals, right? And if I'm honest, plants, they're pulling their weight, right, on climate change. They're doing their bit, right? Animals don't really cause it unless we make them cause it, right? They're not really causing climate change, certainly not the natural levels of animal that exist on the planet. Apart from perhaps Peppa Pig, who, if you ask me, has a very pro-fracking energy about her. And as I say, I've got a 4-year-old. I don't get out much. All of my references are children's cartoons. But people's why I care about climate change. It's why I started working on it. Like, I don't really consider myself an environmentalist as such. I don't think burning incense is a substitute for having a personality. I'm much more interested in just people. Like, and what I mean by that is, if you summed up climate change in one sentence, it is the world's rich drowning the world's poor in their own waste. And that's it. It's a problem of inequality. It's a problem of unfairness, and that's what unjustness, and that's what got me into it in the first place. So, people, that's what we need to focus on. Keep it people-centered. Less polar bears and more impacts on our local communities and the people that we care about. A couple of stats up at the top. The hottest year ever recorded, 2024. Unsurprisingly, we've just been through it. 2024, that's also my PIN number. I change it every year to the warmest year on record. Does it make me more susceptible to fraud? Absolutely. But the important thing is the message is getting out there. Although I am broke. Okay, now, we don't want to look at one single year, we want to look at trends. And if you can see, 2024 is not on there, but 2023 was a very warm year, as well as 2016 as well. Although there's been an upward trend, we've had extra warm years, because as well as climate change from humans, we also have natural fluctuations. We have something called El Nino. If you aren't aware, El Nino are a 5-piece Italian a cappella band. Lovely bunch of boys. Don't trust them with your daughter. So anyway, point is, if we look at the upward trend, the last 3 decades have been consecutively the warmest decades ever recorded in human history. 20 of the warmest years ever recorded have happened since I lost my virginity. And that was one hot summer, I'll tell you that. It's only gotten hotter. And then this is probably the slide, and it takes a second, that scares me the most. This is what keeps me up at night. And this is the changes in carbon dioxide concentration. So this is how fast changes are happening on the planet. And people say, hasn't the climate always changed? But in the last 800,000 years, it's never changed anywhere near as quickly as we've seen it change in the last 100 years. And it's that pace of change that frightens me, because we don't know what that entails. We can't really adapt to that. It's happening quicker than any of us really know what the impacts of that are actually going to mean for the planet. If this is a little bit too technical for you, I do apologize. If I was going to try and maybe just sum it up in a more simple chart, basically humanity has flourished during the lemon and herb era. Right? And now we're moving towards extra hot, and not everybody can handle that. That's climate change. If you haven't enjoyed a Nando's, please do. They don't sponsor the show. Anyway, so what's been causing the changes in temperature? Well, it's been predominantly our burning of fossil fuels, unsurprisingly, in particular our burning of coal, gas, and oil, which was the original name of the band Earth, Wind and Fire, back when they were sponsored by Shell, I believe. But basically, since the Second World War, globally we've increased our use of fossil fuels. We're burning about 75% of climate change happens because of our burning of fossil fuels, and we need to dramatically change that and bring that basically back down to zero quicker than it went up. if we're going to kind of stop the warming happening and continuing. What the impacts of climate change are going to be? Well, I think you can all see from this chart that the planet is going to get squashed and go lots of different colours. And there's going to be 6 of them. So it's all fine. You can choose which one you want to live on. No. Changes in precipitation, surface temperature, sea level rise, all the good stuff. Now, let's get into some of that. Firstly, heat waves. Right. Heat waves are a melting bastard for a lot of people across the world. As the American rapper Nelly once said, it's getting hot in here, so relocate your homes. Good. Some younger people in the audience, I can tell. This is a very, very mixed ability room, if I'm honest. It's either people in their 70s or people that are 20 years old. And as I said at the start, I'm 40, so most of these references will not work for anybody. And I do apologise. And what I need to sort of branch this out and work with like a 70-year-old comedian and a 20-year-old comedian so that they can write specific references for their generations. Anyway, hopefully there's enough in here. If anyone's got any questions, ask at the end. I'll try and explain on the way. So heat waves. Anyway, we think of heat waves happening far away, but we're already dealing with changes in the United Kingdom that we've never seen before. This is the image that was on the newspaper of various newspapers in the United Kingdom the day before we surpassed 40 degrees Celsius for the first time ever in this country. The next day, and I don't actually have the image, I apologise, the next day of these newspapers was just pictures of wildfires. Because, you know, people don't quite get the idea. And the main reason that we should care about heat waves is the same reason that we did care with COVID, right? And that's protecting vulnerable people in society. Because the same way we did with COVID, heat waves are a problem particularly for elderly people, very young children, and pregnant women. And the World Health Organization states that it's also, you know, a real issue as heat waves get longer and more intense for people with underlying conditions such as heart disease, respiratory problems. Again, all vulnerable people in society are what we need to protect. That's why we don't want this extra warming. And again, I say that we want to put people at the center of this and be able to protect people in society that we should be protecting. Now, if you don't care about other people, and we've worked out that a few people in this country don't, how does climate change affect you? How will heat waves impact your life? Well, one way it does is that temperatures don't come down enough at night, right? You don't get enough cooling, especially if you live in a city like Newcastle, whatever. We have something called the urban heat island effect, where cities, because they're made out of, you know, concrete and steel instead of dandelions and shit, they retain a lot more heat, so they stay warm. So you'll find that the countryside is often about, like New York, for instance, the countryside around New York is about 4 degrees cooler during a heat wave at night than the city itself. So one way is that we don't then, because the temperatures don't come down at night, we don't get enough rest, and that means that we're not productive the next day, and it leads to a lot of passive aggression between couples. And that's not from the WHO, that's from my own personal research I've been undertaking. So heat waves impact droughts, and again, we think of that happening far away, but there's already statements about how, especially the south of England, we might be all right up here, but the south of England could run short of water in the next 25 years. And the head of the Environment Agency calls for water use to be cut, and specifically, Sir James Bevan, he says that he wants to see wasting water become as socially unacceptable as blowing smoke in the face of a baby. Two things. One, oddly specific. Like, where did that guy grow up? And two, I live in England, right? I know what you're like. My wife's English. Most of my friends are English. I live in Buckinghamshire, right? You'd think with the accent, but I live in Buckinghamshire. And most of my friends are now English. My son is unfortunately English. And I know what you're going to do is try and make it more acceptable to blow smoke in the face of a baby. I know how you work. I know how you think. Anyway, okay. So we have impacts of heat waves. Heat waves cause droughts. Droughts cause changes in food production, right? And again, we think of this happening far away. And it's true that a lot of food, about half of global food production happens in small-scale farms outdoors around the world. And a lot of those places are going to be impacted by climate change, where it's going to lead to a lot of crop failures. You know, there's talk of like, oh, you know, more CO2 leads to bigger crops, for instance. More yields is something that you hear about. But it doesn't actually lead to more nutrition. It just means things get bigger, but the same bigger thing only has the same amount of nutrition in it, right? It doesn't actually make the thing better for anybody. It just means there's a little bit more and there's a little bit less nutrition in it. But mostly it's going to be negative on food production in terms of you know, has anybody seen the price of olive oil over the last year? Right, it's gone mental because of climate change. Another comedian, a guy called Phil Wang, sent me a message because he found in a supermarket a bottle of olive oil that's in a glass case, right? Because it's now so expensive that supermarkets are putting it in glass case. And that is the dystopian future that we're going to be, you know, the first signs of the apocalypse are when olive oils. And I used to enjoy cooking, right? Cooking was a lot of fun for me because I'd get to make a nice meal for my family, but I didn't have to talk to them while I was doing it, right? And so it was nice, but now I find cooking's really stressful because every recipe just starts with, just add a splash of olive oil. And I'm like, I need more information than that. That's like a $5. What was I going to say? Yeah, so food production. So in the UK, we've already had impacts. In 2018, there was a 3-week period where the south of England had basically no rain whatsoever. We had a drought in 2018, and it meant that the following year, because of the lack of water that crops had got during that year, the following year, chips in the United Kingdom were an inch shorter. And that is not a world I want to live in, ladies and gentlemen. You can't dip wee chips, right? Think about it. The condiment industry, gone because of climate change. Mayonnaise, ketchup, out of business. One of the only joys I have left in my entire life is on a Tuesday, right? I like to go and get a bag of chips from the local chip shop, right? Because that's what I used to do at my grand's house when I lived in Scotland. I don't have any rituals in Buckinghamshire, right? I don't have family, so I'm trying to keep up one ritual, and it's basically eating fried food. And so I go to the chip shop on a Tuesday, and sometimes I get a bag of chips and I bring it home and I find a really, really big chip inside it. And I cannot tell you how much joy that gives me. I don't get out the house much at all. And I pull it out and I hold it aloft like it's the sword and the stone, yeah? And I'm like, look, have you seen the size of that chip? And my wife always plays along, and she goes, well, Matt, it must have eaten all the other chips. And we laugh, and we laugh, and we laugh. Your children won't have that, ladies and gentlemen. Big chips, that's what we're fighting for. Climate change, there are difficult choices to be made. You can either have big chips, or you can stop flying to Magaluf to finger someone from Middlesbrough, when you could just go to Middlesbrough and do it. The solutions are there, people. And yes, I do say Middlesbrough at every single place that I do this show. Genuinely. Okay, that's Glasgow. That's genuinely Glasgow in the United States. Glasgow, Montana. Sounds like Hannah Montana's scary big sister. And so I think people don't quite understand as much the flooding. It's less obvious to us because obviously we get the idea of the planet warming and fires and stuff like that. Heat waves. But basically what happens is we have a warmer planet, so because the world's hotter, you get more evaporation. So basically more water goes into the clouds and we get more rain. That's pretty much it. So for every 1 degree of warming, you get about 7% more rainfall on average. We've already warmed by about 1.3, 1.4 degrees globally. So you're talking about we're at a stage where we're getting about 10% more rain already on average across the world than we designed the world for, right? And if we go, take that forward and the warming that's kind of likely to happen if we don't change much, you're talking about maybe a fifth more rainfall on average. And I cannot stress enough how no single government or city anywhere in the world, apart from those that are disappearing because of this, are preparing at all, right? Like, entire city, nobody's really planning for this. And where I'm from, Glasgow in Scotland is one of the most at-risk cities. I mean, I imagine Newcastle probably is up there. I haven't actually checked. But any city with like a big river in it's pretty likely to experience some of that. But Glasgow is in one of the top cities in Europe at risk from increased flooding by the middle of this century. So much so that local band Wet 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 have decided to add an extra wet to their name, just to make it scientifically accurate. Okay. Plus, I mean, flooding does a lot of damage. As you'll see, this is the US. This was a flood in the south. One good thing, though, is that obviously water, if something stays in water for a while, it shrinks. So we might solve the SUV problem just through climate change. I'm not entirely sure. And also, getting deliveries will be considerably easier when they just float it into your house in the future. Stop the boats. Let's not. Let's add a few more boats, if I'm honest. And golf is going to be considerably more fun going forward. Yeah, obviously wildfire. We get the idea. Wildfires are like fires, something that we inherently as humans are designed to be terrified of, right? We get it. It's part of our, how we've evolved. We see a fire, you run away from it, right? It's harder to get people worried about other things around, so that's climate change. People get it. They see the wildfires, whether it's Australia or what we've seen in California, and we get it. It's terrifying. But like sea level rise, for instance, coastal erosion isn't something we're programmed to be like scared about because it takes a long, long time. But it is something that's a really, really big impact of climate change. Now, sea level rise happens for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it happens because of thermal expansion. So as water warms, it expands. I often use that as an excuse if I've put on a bit of weight over Christmas. Because I'm like, we're mostly made of water, it's just climate change. Feel free to use that one. And then the other thing is obviously melting ice caps, glaciers, that sort of thing. Anything that's on land that's coming into the water raises sea levels up. Now, quick tangent, sorry, before I explain sea level rise. It's hard to have conversations about climate change, as I say, right? And often the conversation, like this is a nice thing. I quite like having this chat because I don't actually have to listen to any of your opinions. And it's a one-way conversation, so it's quite easy for me. No, I will chat afterwards. But having conversations with people close to us can be quite difficult. I was trying to think about how to talk to my mum about climate change because she doesn't quite, get what I do, or it's not something she thinks a lot about. And I was trying to think about it because, and the thing is, you have to not just go in to talk to other people about climate change. You have to not go in and just be like, you should care about this, right? And tell them what you care about. You have to ask them what they already care about and find a way of talking to them about it. So I was like, right, one of my mum's favorite celebrities does a lot of stuff on climate change. Ban Ki-moon. No, I said that and she said, I don't know who that is. But I said, no, Mum, one of your favourite celebrities, Leonardo DiCaprio, I think his name is. DiCaprio, right. He does a lot of stuff on climate change. He made a film about climate change before the flood. He was the UN envoy for peace on climate change. He has his own foundation about climate change. And the reason that he cares about it so much is because the only reason he got famous in the first place was due to an iceberg. He's trying to save them. And obviously he cares about the future generations, if you look at who he dates. Okay, so that's Leo with my favourite ex-UN Secretary General of all time, Ban Ki-moon. Yeah? Anyone got another favourite? No, of course not. He's the best. So that's Leo with Ban Ki-moon. And this is a picture of me at Warrington Bank Quay with a cardboard cutout of a moon. Warrington Bank Quay moon. The best visual joke about an ex-UN Secretary General you're going to see all week. My wife said, I'm not getting off the train to take that picture for you. It won't be worth it. She stands corrected. Right, now, this bit's going to need some explaining, given the age groups in this room. Anyone know who these young men are? Yeah, okay, a few people. Great. Okay, if you don't, these are some eminent scientists who talked about what sea level rise was going to be out to the end of this millennium. And they started talking about it about 22 years ago, 23 years ago, like a long, long time ago. If you aren't aware, this was like one of the first ever studies that was done about sea level rise. And specifically, this was their abstract, like the kind of headline conclusion of them was this. I've been to the year 3000. Not much has changed, but we live underwater, and your great-great-great-granddaughter is pretty fine. Now, let's take that one bit at a time, shall we? First of all, these young gentlemen should have been given a Nobel Prize, because that was 5 years before An Inconvenient Truth came out, right? They were talking about climate change back in the early 2000s. I didn't care about climate change in 2001. All I cared about was getting good grades in my exams at school, not because I'm a nerd, but because if I did get good grades, my parents were going to let me and my best friend Colin go to Magaluf for the summer. Anyway, now that I've got a PhD, I'm able to peer review this analysis, and I do have a few issues with it, if I'm honest. Firstly, they didn't specify what sort of concentration of greenhouse gases they were assuming out to the year 3000, right? They didn't really say what is humanity going to do out to that period. So I had a quick look at what the impacts of climate change are going to be in terms of sea level rise and flooding on different places. This is obviously central London. You'll recognise it. This is us under 2 degrees of warming, and this is what happens if we don't put any extra flood prevention in from what's currently in place today, right? This is us solving climate change, by the way. 2 degrees is sort of what we're... So, and then this is the same image under 4 degrees of warming. You'll see that it's even higher. There's probably sharks in the House of Commons. So I guess not much has changed. Am I right? Yeah, but, you know, it kind of shows you what's likely to happen. This is a bit more of a stark example. Another example I like to give. This is New York. You'll recognize potentially Wall Street there with the bull, and you can see under 2 degrees of warming, some flooding there. And I'm giving quite large Western cities here. Obviously, there are even larger cities in Asia that have even larger populations that are going to be impacted by this. But you can see, New York's a coastal city. And it's going to be impacted there under 2 degrees without any extra flood prevention. And this is the same image under 4 degrees of warming. And that's my second issue with Busted's analysis, is that I don't think people will be under there taking selfies. I don't think we will live underwater. I think our adaptation to climate change is going to be incredibly difficult. We're talking about potentially 150, 200 million people around the world in coastal cities displaced by climate change, right? And that's... So, with nothing that we've ever seen before globally. We don't really know how to deal with that. And that's on top of all the other stuff that I've talked about. Floods, heat waves, crop failures, wildfire, everything. So the world is not going to be a stable place if we do not address this. And my third and final issue with Busted's analysis was their life expectancy assumptions. So I went in, and apparently someone else has done this now on, was it more or less? There's one of the BBC Radio 4. Somebody's done this. I've been doing this for a lot longer. I calculated roughly what age my great-great-great-granddaughter will be, given some National Statistics website. I'm an academic. Took some statistics, extrapolated that out. Anyone want to guess what age she might be? 786. I don't think she is. Fine. I think those boys like an older woman. A bit too old. They need to do some more maths homework. That's what I go to school for. Yeah, 2 guys there laughing at that one. That was their other song. It doesn't work if I have to explain it. Okay. So, if I was going to sum up this whole first part, it would be that if we don't tackle climate change immediately, the future will be like the Kevin Costner film Waterworld. Shit. So, can we, Shongs? Right, the good news is that we're doing some stuff. Scotland is generating enough from wind energy to power 2 Scotlands, and nobody needs 2 Scotlands. What are we doing with them? Is one the nice Scotland that we put out when we have guests coming round? That's already Edinburgh. Right, and in the UK, we're building the world's largest wind farm. We're going big on offshore wind, and we should, because the costs have come right down over the last decade. And we've got obviously a lot of sea, and we've got a lot of wind. It makes sense to go big on this. The scale of these, each one of these is roughly the same size as the Eiffel Tower, right? They're enormous now. People don't get how much the industry's changed over the last decade. Each one of them is the same size as the Eiffel Tower, and each one of the blades, for instance, is the same size as 47 Chewbaccas. And he was a big guy, wasn't he? Although if you do prefer Imperial. Is that your level? Okay, so the good news is that we're doing quite a lot on electricity, and we need to make electricity cleaner, which is great. The bad news is that we also need to then electrify lots of other things. In particular, we need to electrify our transport, and we need to electrify our heating in the UK. And those two things we haven't been doing anywhere near as much as we should. And basically, you can then electrify most things in the economy. About 90% of stuff you can electrify, and you can get most of that, again, about 90% of that electricity from renewables without a problem, right? And then you can do some extra bits around hydrogen, around batteries, some extra things. Obviously a bit of nuclear in there and stuff as well. But we kind of know what we need to do to solve it. But none of it's really happening at scale for a number of reasons. The worst thing in the entire world are SUVs. One person applauding, everyone else drove here. And I don't say this lightly, but this chart here shows what caused the most amount of climate change between the decade 2010 to 2020, the 2010s, right, that we just went through. What caused climate change? The largest contribution to climate change was the power sector, and a lot of that was, some of it was probably, coal plants in China and stuff like that. But some of it is a lot of it's in power in developing countries that need electricity for basic amenities, lighting, refrigeration, stuff like that. So like a fair chunk of this is probably sort of essential for people to get past. The second largest contribution to climate change in that decade was SUVs. Not cars, just cars that are too big to park in normal parking spaces. Right? I call them such unnecessary vehicles because I'm a bit sassy. But basically, and there's other things that cause climate change, and there's other things I'll talk about, aviation and stuff, but we've made cars more efficient. We've been improving cars, but we've been driving more, and most importantly, we've been driving bigger, unnecessary cars for absolutely no reason whatsoever. I mean, I feel like there's enough reasons to get rid of SUVs, just because they're fucking annoying, right? And also, you're 9 times more likely to kill a child in one of them, right? Just normal reasons to get rid of it without even the climate change aspect. And then you put that on top of it. And and I understand, there's a few people that need them for very, very specific things, but most people do not. To me, buying an SUV is a bit like buying a gun, right? In the sense that it's just a thing to protect yourself. And I think it needs to be kind of put in that context to people. And basically, you should have to, the same, whatever it is, interview that you have to do for owning a firearm, you should have to do for owning an SUV. Anyway, we need to move to other stuff. Obviously, we need a lot better public transport, especially in cities. We need people to become healthier. But electric vehicles, unless we radically change our entire society, electric vehicles are probably going to have to take up most of the slack. You can own about 4 electric vehicles for the same emissions at the moment as one petrol and diesel car of the same size. Like they're about a quarter of the emissions over the entire lifetime of how they're made. And there's improvements. John was talking about earlier with battery recycling. Like the batteries were difficult, but there are constant improvements, as you can imagine, because people aren't just throwing them away because they know that there is a resource there. It's just taking a little while, and there's problems obviously with charging. I don't own an SUV yet because I don't know where to charge it, and the costs of charging it publicly are a lot higher than being able to charge it at home. So there's difficulties, but we're getting there. And also the next Transformers film is just going to be 3 hours of Optimus Prime recharging himself, which is going to be considerably better than any of the previous Transformers films. Flying's a tricky one, right? It's a tricky one because we all love to have a holiday, and I get it, and I don't really think people... It's something that we might have to decide collectively as a society. And I feel like there needs to be an actual open conversation about it. If we decide that everybody should be able to fly once a year or something like that, I think that's fine. We then need to find a way of doing something about those emissions, offsetting those emissions. But the aviation industry is not really doing very much, if I'm honest. And we don't really have solutions. Electric planes are only going to be able to eventually, in 20 years, fly very short distance, Newcastle to London or something like that is what the distance. So we really need to try and just stop the growth in flying. Stop people doing it as much. I still think it's going to happen in society. How do we do that? So a couple of options. One option, which has been touted a lot, and I think it's a sensible option, is a frequent flyer tax. So it turns out about 70% of flights in the UK are taken by around about 15% of people. Very small number of people, and it's a lot of those people fly all the time because they have a second home in the south of France, stuff like that, right? So a lot of flights are... So this proposal is basically everybody gets 1 flight a year, you take a second flight that year on your passport, and you start paying this tax. You take a 3rd flight, you pay a slightly higher progressive tax, and so on and so on and so on. So the more you fly, the more you're paying for it. Now, I think that would be a great thing. I don't know if it will happen in this parliament or not. If it doesn't, I've got a solution. My solution is some people are afraid of flying. I think we need to make more people afraid of flying, right? I'm thinking glass floors on planes. I'm thinking actual snakes on a plane. I'm thinking the only in-flight entertainment is the film Alive. I'm thinking every second seat on a flight is a crying baby. And how are we getting them to cry? We're blowing smoke in their faces. Solved. Okay. See? It all comes round. Embarrassing for them coming out with the same earrings on this evening. I love that joke. Okay. So there's some other stuff we can do about it. Food, and I'm going to try and skip through some of the next bit. But basically, we need to make better choices, and it's difficult because, climate change is already... So this chart, again, it's an interesting chart. It shows that in the first half of this century, due to population increase, going from 2 billion people to about 8 billion people, globally, we need to produce as much food in the first half of this century as has ever been produced in the history of mankind. I'm not going to sugarcoat that fact for you, because that would require more deforestation to grow the sugar. And then we're dealing with that whilst... So it's something difficult, right? But I think, human ingenuity, we were kind of doing a good job of it. And then we just add climate change into the mix, and we make something that's difficult much, much, much more difficult. And the impacts of climate change are obviously being seen across the world. For instance, this man's hands have grown so big, he can no longer eat his favorite foods. No, changes in parrot migration are ruining crops and stuff like that. There's lots and lots of changes happening. So we need to kind of change what we eat potentially. And this is something that is called the Eat Lancet diet. It's the planetary diet, if you look it up. And it's basically, we need to, it looked at what's the healthiest diet for the planet and also the healthiest diet for humans. And it turned out, unsurprisingly, that it's the things that are already synonymous with being healthy. The Japanese diet, the Mediterranean diet, right? That's basically what we should all be eating globally if we want to be healthy and also, the most sustainable for climate change. Yeah, right. Apologies. Right, I'm going to move on to the last bit now. There's more, but we'll keep going. So, must we change? Can we change? Oui. I didn't pass my A-levels, French. But I didn't do A-levels. So, will we change? This is the question. I can't answer this, right? Will, it comes down to collective will, doesn't it? It comes down to what everyone does and decides to do together on this. There's a few things I just want to say very quickly before I finish up. Firstly, this was the first ever image of the Earth taken by Tom Hanks. The film Apollo 13. No, this is the first ever image of the Earth that was taken. And when we saw this message, I think we've heard again and again and again, has been that we need to protect it because we only have one home, right? And we hear that a lot, as a phrase. We need to protect it. We only have one home. There's no planet B. We only have one home. But the problem with that messaging is that the people that cause the most amount of climate change don't understand the concept of only having one home. Right? About the top 1% of earners in the world, those people emit double the emissions that the poorest 50%, half of 3.5 billion people in the planet cause, right? It is a massive inequality problem. And there's not much that a wealth tax can't solve, but it can also really help solve climate change, right? So we need to get better messaging on climate change. And we've got these people, other people that, richest people around in the world are so disconnected from this issue. They don't understand it. They say, we'll just move to Mars to solve the situation. Have you ever tried just moving house? Difficult that is. So that's not going to happen. And then we're dealing with, obviously we're dealing with what's happening in the US at the moment and many other countries, and it's a difficult situation, and it requires people pulling together to do stuff about it. And that's the only way it'll be solved from a grassroots perspective and people standing up. We're dealing with online confusion on climate change, people still peddling climate denial. For instance, this is a Fox News person who, quite a famous climate denier, who doesn't think climate change is an issue because, for comparison, the atmosphere of Venus is 96.5% CO2, and it's still there. Good point, Steve. It's not like it's 400 degrees Celsius. I mean, I think we can aim as a barometer of where we live a bit higher than just something being there, right? I mean, Wolverhampton is there. Okay, so we're dealing with that. Now, very quickly, the two questions I get asked, and these might be, I might be preemptively answering some questions. The two questions I get asked about climate change the most by people are we screwed? Right? That's the first question people ask me. And what they want me to say is either, yes, we're screwed, and so they go, well, I don't have to get involved. It's already too late. I don't have to do anything. Or they want me to say, no, it's going to be fine, so that they go, cool, it's getting fixed. I don't have to get involved. I don't have to do anything, right? And the answer is neither of those things, right? The answer is that we are not screwed, nor are we not screwed. The answer, unfortunately, is that climate change is not binary, right? I like to say that there are an infinitesimal number of levels of fucked, right? Apologies for swearing. But it's important to understand that every action that we take, every 0.1 of a degree of warming that we stop, reduces suffering somewhere in the world at some point in time. And when you take that on board, that every single action, every single thing that we do matters, it's really terrifying, and it can be quite debilitating, right? And so it's a difficult one to get past that, when you sort of actually have to sit with the reality of the situation. that we aren't necessarily screwed, but also that every single thing and action that's taken now going forward matters to everybody. Well, it's here collectively. You know, we're all here at this point in time on the planet. So, are we screwed? Now, lots of companies and oil and gas companies as well will like to say that we aren't, and they'll be telling you that everything's going to be fine and that they're changing and that they're all going to be. The truth is that that is not the case at all, right? Nobody is coming to save us, and most of these companies are not doing anything of any significance whatsoever. I cannot stress that enough. And lots of them have set targets for 20. You know, you'll hear even just companies right out there will say, well, we've got a net zero target. We're going to go net zero by 2050, right? And we do have to achieve this, and you know, we're doing that at a country level, and we have to hit net zero. It's the only way to stop warming continuing. But these are both net zero by 2050, right? And this one causes 2.5 times the amount of climate change that this one does. And so the path, how we get there, is far more important than the end result, right? You know, net zero is necessary, but far, far from sufficient. So what I actually care is what companies are saying they're going to do in 2030, and do they have a plan in place that's realistic? And are they actually trying to reduce their own emissions, or are they just relying on lots of offsets or other schemes and putting things in place to just prolong their position, right? And that's what we're finding has happened more and more. So, I promise you there's going to be some more jokes in a minute. So you've got people telling you that everything's going to be fine, and it's not. And you've also got people out there saying that the world is ending and that everything's going to be awful, right? For instance, this is a UK academic who does a thing about deep adaptation, you know, talking about how we basically have to just accept that this is where we're going, you know, this future. And he says, when I say starvation, destruction, migration, disease, and war, I mean in your own life. With the power down, soon you won't have water coming out your tap. You will depend on your neighbours for food and warmth. You will become malnourished. You won't know whether to stay or go. You will fear being violently killed before starving to death. Eerily similar to what my dad said before I moved to London. And I think it might just be middle-aged men going through a crisis. What I like to look at is the philosophers of our time. People who understand that change is possible, and it might seem desperate and that we won't do it, but it is still possible. We're not locked into any of this. It is collective will. Do we have the strength and understanding to do this as a society? And you know, I cannot answer that question. So, thankfully, the second question that I get asked the most by the public, once they say, are we screwed? And I give them a big, long, rambling answer about how you can't answer that question. The second question I get asked is, what can I do about it? And that gives me hope. That probably gives me the most hope, because people then instantly go, right, actually, I just want to know what I can do to help. Right? They want someone else to solve it, and when you say someone else isn't solving it, they say, what can I do? Now, what is the answer to that? Firstly, does your personal carbon footprint matter? A little bit. It's a starting point, but it's far, far from the end. If you're in the top 1% of earners worldwide, as I mentioned before, does your carbon footprint matter? Yes. Stop flying to Thailand 3 times a year, right? There's things you can do if you are wealthy. And I get that you might be like, well, what's the point in being wealthy? Fuck off. Now, most of us will probably be in this next 9%, right? We're a fairly wealthy country. What can you do? You can do a bit. You can start making some changes. Sure, you can change what you eat. You can change your transport habits. You can try and do some stuff at home. You can do a little bit, right? You might be able to even half your emissions. But once you get to that, you kind of hit a wall. There's not really a lot you can do. And the problem is that we've got this kind of hyper-individualized society where the expectation is on individuals and people to solve climate change, and that's not going to be how it's solved. We're only going to get so far with that. It's not going to make all of a difference. And it's important to do lots of stuff for other reasons as well, not just for your own emissions, but to show other people what's possible, and to, if you buy a plant-based burger somewhere, not only are you reducing your emissions, but you're also paying money for a business that then is going to be able to grow and invest and make that business better and cheaper for other people. There are knock-on effects of what you do and the decisions that you make. And that's the way to look at climate change. Rather than looking inwards, we will need to look outwards at the impact that we can have on society and that we can have on the world, right? So where you bank is really important, for instance. Lots of banks out there are still investing in fossil fuels, and that is your money, and you can tell them where you want it to go. If you do want to change your bank, go and have a look online. Just literally go like Green Bank or whatever online. Feel free to use this letter that I put together. You can add your name in and send it to them. And then there's other changes that are happening. I think petty rivalries might solve climate change. And I'm absolutely fine with that. I mean, so like the UK target is net zero by 2050. Scotland's target is by 2045. And genuinely, that's just to piss off English people. Nothing. Scotland, Glasgow and Edinburgh are fighting to become the UK's first net zero city. And then we've got protest and the role of protest out there in society. And there's a lot of issues at the moment. With protests and stuff. This one obviously struck a chord, I think, much more with me. I went to this in 2019. This was children. This was a kids' school march. This wasn't adults or other, this was children leaving school because they're worried about their future. And that struck home a lot more with me. And this was just before I had a kid. And people saw that. Some people saw that and they said, wow, that really gives me a lot of hope for the future. And that is the stupidest thing I have ever heard in my entire life. The idea that children are giving you hope for the future, right? It is not the way around it's supposed to be, right? And this really, really, struck a chord with me. And I plan on getting my son out protesting as soon as I can, because he's a toddler, so he's got very naturally sticky hands anyway. He can glue himself to whatever building he wants. And people have an issue with climate protesters and stuff at the moment, but since having a child, my views have changed completely. Because like somebody deciding to go out and sit down in the middle of the road and refuse to move, right? I'm like, that's just a regular occurrence in my daily life now. I'm like, okay, this is what we're doing now. People are like, oh no, they've thrown soup at expensive painting. It's a fucking Sunday in my house. It's just normal, it's fine. Chill out. They've probably got a reason for doing it. There's an underlying reason. Maybe we should look into that. So, we need to look outwards, is what I'm saying, as a society. I go and do this, I talk around the country as much as I can, and I've looked at what my impact is of even just going out and speaking to people, right? And if I didn't exist, right, not to get all It's a Wonderful Life, but if I didn't exist, right, my emissions would maybe drop by, 5 tons, 7 tons, something like that. I could reduce by not existing every year, right? But by going out and talking to people, other people have said to me that they've made changes. Someone sold their car after coming to one of my shows. Other people have, changed stuff, got renewable energy providers. A family were like, we don't fly anymore. Other people have made decisions, right? And those are the things that I can put a number on. Lots of other people have said, I went out and joined whatever, Friends of the Earth, something like that, right? There's other impacts that I've had that aren't even, I can't put a number on. But the stuff that I could put a number on, I calculated that roughly it's about 10 times the size of my own individual impact by actually going out and engaging with the world. And that's just one stupid Scottish man that can't even walk downstairs properly, right? Think about what we can do collectively. And this is a very last example. This is a friend of mine it's not, my friend's not a car. But I have a friend in the United States who I hadn't seen for about 10, or spoken to for about 10 years. And then during COVID, I reached out to him because, it was a time where, I think we were all in our houses, we were all thinking about stuff, and I reached out to this friend that I hadn't seen for a long time. And he's American, and I was like, what have you been doing? And he builds cars. That's what he's spent since the last time I saw him. He got really into building cars. And he had 3 of these, proper American, big, Fast and the Furious, I don't know if big, powerful engine cars. And I spoke to him and stuff and chatted to him. And then he read my book. And I was like, I've written a book, and blah, blah, blah. And he read the book. And then I spoke to him again about a month later. And he got back to me and he said, I've sold all 3 of my cars. And I'm now building an electric car from this, whatever it is, a Studebaker or something. So he's like, and if an American person who likes cars can change, anybody can change, surely. But it's just a nice example of like, you don't really know what talking to people and going out and engaging will actually achieve in the world. And I just advise you to do that. Find your own way of doing stuff, find your own way of thinking, your own group, the people that you know, nobody should be telling you what it is you need to do, but doing something. That's why I think, you know, with climate protest, you know, when the protests and stuff started a few years ago, it made me feel uncomfortable, and then I realized that actually, but doing something is much better than doing nothing, even if it's the wrong thing or whatever. It's shifting the dial. Anyway, I'm finished. Thank you very much for your time. Should we take questions for 5 minutes? Is that all right? Thanks.